All right, so here we go. Tonight we are on step 2. Who did the homework from last week? Oh, that's a swing and a miss.
This was a rough week.
It was a rough week. Well, I love when I come here and I see familiar faces. It shows me that you're still here, you're still putting the work in, you're choosing to stay, you're choosing to live today. And so last week when we talked about step 1, fully conceding to our innermost self that we're alcoholics and we're addicts, right? We really have to understand what that means. We really have to identify with it being a progressive disease over any considerable period, like we just read. It gets worse, never better. We have to look at our lives and understand that. Understand why self-knowledge, just knowing. If you're anything like me, you've probably known for a long time that there was a problem. People have been telling you that you got a problem, and you've had some knowledge about addiction. You can see it in your families. You can see it in areas of your life. You've experienced extreme consequences from your addiction. You've probably been seeing these things consistently. We also looked at why it's a thinking problem. Who could tell me why it's a thinking problem?
Because it centers in the mind.
Centers in the mind. Because I think that this time when I pick up, it's going to be different. But I've collected data and evidence for 20 years that shows me it ain't ever going to be different. It always ends the same.
Always the same.
Usually jail, prison, institutions, right? Same thing.
What's that?
Progressive disease, aggressive recovery. And then we looked at the true insanity with the jaywalking description. So after analyzing our life again, remember the first 51 pages of the big book is designed for you to diagnose yourself. And when we see those things, we're able to fully concede. We look at the powerless. Who could tell me the difference how I described last week between powerless and unmanageability?
Powerless is external, manageability is external, powerlessness is internal.
Sure, exactly. So powerless is the internal struggle, the unmanageability is the external struggle. So now here, that brings us to step 2, which we're going to go over tonight. Now, if steps 1, 2, and 3 is the solution, right? That's the solution followed by the rest of the steps. Admitting defeat, waving the white flag. Step 1, fully conceding, coming to believe in a power in step 2, making a decision in step 3. If we're really honest about that and we don't know how to apply it, it's real easy to do 1, 2, and 3. There are 2 conclusions in a decision. It's like, well, shit, I'm powerless, I'm at crossroads. That checks out, pretty unmanageable. Okay, believe in a higher power, just did it. All right, make a decision, done. Right? I don't even know how to apply. I don't even know what I'm doing, and that is the meat and potatoes. Because remember, there's a solution when we talked about experiencing psychic change, being rocketed into a 4th dimension of existence, which we not even dreamed. Well, in order to do that, we got to let a higher power into our heart, but we have to do our part. When we talk more about step 3 next week, it's a 50-50 relationship we're going to be developing with our higher power. The 50% on our part is the action steps on a day-to-day basis. The 50% on my higher power's part is the outcomes in my life, right? So when I do step 2 today and we look over this, it's going to be important to identify as best as you can this power. So when you make that decision in step 3, you know what your part is. Because remember, as I always say, the power from the knowledge comes from the application. If I don't know how to apply it, I'm surely not going to get a result. It's program of action. So that brings us to step 2 tonight. Now, step 2, in my experience, my opinion as well, it's an easily overlooked chapter. First off, it's wordy. The second thing is, it'd be real simple, real easy if I was sponsoring you and I said, hey, do you believe in God? And you go, yeah, I believe in God. I'm like, let's go to step 3 then. And you'd be surprised. It happens all the time, man. So what We Agnostics is designed to do, we're going to break it down into sections. So tonight, We Agnostics is designed to rebuttal you before you could object to believing in a higher power. Right? So it's going to make a whole bunch of points that you would possibly tell me of why you can't believe and you won't believe. And why it's not possible for you. So it's going to take those right away from you and show you why you have the ability to do so. So at the end when it says, well, it's actually like the 2nd or 3rd page. I've always wondered why I wasn't deeper into the book at the end when it says, do you now believe or are you willing to believe? Right? But the point is that at the end of it all, you have to have some sort of starting point, some point that you can build off of. And I'd ask you to identify some morals, some values, some spiritual characteristics that you believe God to be to you, a personal relationship. So we're going to talk about that tonight. So we're going to get started because we're already running out of time. And I drank a bang tonight, so I'll apologize in advance. Okay, so we're on chapter 4, We Agnostics. All right, so we're on page 44. So we're going to break it down with each objection or rebuttal. We're going to break it down so you understand it. Because again, this is a wordy chapter. And you could read this thing and not understand anything that's going on. So I'm going to break it down for you guys tonight in a way which I hope that you can understand it. So here we are. In the preceding chapters, you've learned something about addiction. That is step 1. We hope we've made the distinction, clear distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If you want to write powerless next to this part of the page, this is a good description of powerless. If when you honestly want to stop and you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking or using you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably an alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. It says it to us all through the book. The main object of this book is to enable you to find a power greater in yourself which will solve your problem. We got two choices. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the unconsciousness of our tolerable situation as best we could, and the other is to accept spiritual help. That's the key. Remember, the easiest way that I could explain to you guys the difference between like religion and spirituality. Spirituality is an experience, religion is organized. We're talking about forming a relationship with a higher power that we can experience. And every time I do that, I'm doing like a big old piece of God. Chunks, right? I'm spiritually intoxicated.
Hell yeah.
Because don't mistake it. I like the effect produced by drugs and alcohol. Right here, right now, at this moment, that doesn't change. I still like the effect. But what I like far greater is the effects produced by God in my life. They got legs, right? It's got legs on it, right? It lasts all day, and I introduce those things into my lifestyle in a way that I get to experience God throughout my day. I try to organize my day in a way that I experience God. That gives me the least amount of time to do what I want to do, and I'll take advantage of every opportunity. Believe that. Okay, so only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he's an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as it means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed in alcoholic death or to live upon spiritual basis are not easy alternatives to face. So there it is again. We got two choices. There's no in between. The step one homework: live in recovery or live in addiction. There is no in between for guys like us anymore. I'm either choosing to live or I'm choosing to die. I'm working on recovery, I'm working on a relapse. It's saying it three different ways. But it isn't so difficult. About half of our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue. Hoping against hope, we were not true alcoholics. Here it is again. But after a while, we had to face the fact. We must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Three different ways right there. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows you need not be disconcerted. Okay, so this is going to be the first point that it's going to make. So if you're making notes in your book, and the bottom corner of this bottom paragraph, I want you to write morals and values. So the first point it's about to make, before we read it, it's saying just having morals and values isn't going to get the job done. I've always wanted to be a good father. I've always wanted to be a good son. I've always wanted to be honest and keep my commitments and a productive member of society. I've always wanted to be a leader. I've always wanted to, be trusted. I've always wanted those things. And if I asked every single person here in the midst of your last run, deep into the addiction on the last run, if you love your kids, right? You mean that shit. There is no doubt about that. But the facts are your actions are reflecting something completely different. And it's unacceptable, right? So when we get sober, we feel that again. We don't like that, but you've always loved your kids. But the problem is the power ain't there. So this is the first point it's going to make. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome addiction, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So when we start to identify with the homework in step 2, whether it's God, G-O-D, whether it's laws of attraction, whether it's love, whether it's the spirit of the universe, whether it's Jesus, whatever it is for you, and I'll give you guys a quick example of this, okay? If I was to ask you to describe, let's say you believe in laws of attraction, right? And putting positive vibes out to the universe and getting it in return. If you were to describe to me in spiritual characteristics how to put positive vibes into the universe, what would that be? Loving and sober and tolerant and honest and forgiving and committed and active and taking action and positive and honest, right? If I was to describe Jesus in spiritual characteristics, his identity, he'd be loving, sober, honest, forgiving, tolerant. If your higher power is love, how do you display love? Well, you're honest, sober, tolerant, it's the same thing, dude. Whatever you best grasp and gravitate towards, that's what we need to apply those spiritual characteristics. We're channeling this power to give us the strength to do it. So when we make that decision in step 3, we know how to apply it. Does that make sense? It leads you right back to the same thing. Whatever power you believe in. Okay. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. obviously, but how and where were we to find that power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. The main object of this book is to enable you to find a power great in yourself which will solve your problem. That means we're going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man, watch his hope rise as we discuss his drug problem, alcoholic problems, explain our fellowship, but his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we've reopened a subject which our man thought he neatly evaded or entirely ignored. So if you want to write on the side, prejudiced about God or resentment towards God. So this is another point it's going to make. Okay? Now, anyone who might have a resentment towards God, or typically when I start sponsoring guys, they're going to tell me their two main things that they're upset about right away. And usually those two things is the God thing, one. And the second thing is, how am I going to make amends to my mom and my dad for the 15th millionth time? How's that going to be different? I got some fear. I don't even know how I'm going to approach that one. They're usually going to tell you right away. So if you have resentment towards God and you question God, or you were forced religion, your parents forced it on you, went to Catholic, whatever the case may be, this is the easiest example I can give. On the bottom of this page, write G.O.D. Good orderly direction. So when you see that word, it means good, orderly direction. Because ultimately that's all it's trying to get us to do, is do the next right thing and live with integrity. And then miracles start to happen in our life. This is a power that flows through us. This chapter is going to end with the fundamental idea God is in us. But it gets obscured by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or another it is there. So if anyone's prejudiced about God or has resentments, we can just look at it right now and say it means good, orderly direction, G-O-D. Can we agree on that?
Yep.
Okay. We know how he feels. We've shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Many of us have been so violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him which someone tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected a particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked at this world wearing individuals wearing theological systems, inexplainable calamity with deep skepticism. We look askance at many individuals who claim to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it at all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, well, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Okay, so this is the next objection or rebuttal it's going to hit you guys with right now. So I want you to write just believe right here. And I'm going to accent some words, and I want you to underline these words. Okay? So now what we're looking at is just believing. Came to believe. That's all we're looking at right now at this point. And pay attention to these words right here. Okay. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice, express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results. Just being willing, you'll still get results. Even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power. So I just got to be willing to believe. I don't even have to understand it. I don't have to comprehend it. I don't even have to fully define it. And I'll get results. So I'm not asking you to do those things. Much to our relief, we discovered we need not consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient. Your inadequate belief is sufficient. You don't even have to comprehend it. You don't even have to define it. You just got to be willing to believe, and it's sufficient to get results. You see the point it's making? So if I was to sit down with you and you're like, well, I don't believe this, I got to comprehend it, fully define, understand it, see this power. Well, don't trip, you don't have to. So you can't tell me that when I ask you to believe in a power. Okay. Your inadequate belief was sufficient to approach and effect a contact with him as soon as we admitted the possible, just a possibility of an existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things. We began to be possessed with a new sense of power, direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms for those who seek him. To us, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding. To those who earnestly seek, it's open, we believe, to all men. So it's open to all of you if you earnestly seek. You don't have to fully define, you don't have to comprehend. Your inadequate belief is sufficient. That's the possibility, just a willingness to believe that there's a possibility you'll get results, and don't worry about it because it's open to everybody. Does that make sense? Okay. When therefore we speak to you about God, we mean your own conception. That's another beautiful thing. Believe your own, it's a personal relationship which you develop. This applies to other spiritual expressions you'll find in this book. Don't let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. So this is going to be spiritually progressive. Just like your disease is progressive, so is recovery. When you're doing the right thing, recovery is progressive too. It progressively gets better. They talk about being on a pink cloud. I hate's a strong word, but I hate when people say, oh yeah, I'm off that pink cloud. Well, I don't know about you, but I've been on a pink cloud for over 4 years because I continue to do what I did to stay on the cloud.
Yeah.
You don't have to come off of it. Just keep putting the work in. Do the same things. Experience God. Be of service. Love people through action. And in doing so, by doing your part, the outcomes in your life tend to be better than anything you could ever have planned. So the next part we're going to go, I want you to underline start, and it's going to say grow 3 different times here because it's implying that it's going to grow. This is the beginning. This is the starting point. It's one thing to believe in God, but it's another thing to experience God. Once I start to experience God, it's just a fact to me. No matter what my life throws me, I stay the course. I live in those spiritual characteristics, and everything tends to work out because I've collected data for 4 years. But in the beginning, I didn't know that. The principle associated with step 2 is hope. I didn't know that. Sure, I'm Catholic. I went to church. I was an altar boy, a Eucharistic minister, doing all these things. But I was getting high at church. I stole out of the collection basket. How well that worked for me? Not very well. But I know how to apply spirit. You guys are looking at me crazy as hell right now. My bad, brother. I thought we were in the tree of trust right here. You guys getting real judgmental. Okay, so at the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood Him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which seemed entirely out of reach. But that was growth. But if we wish to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. We need to ask ourselves but one short question. So put a couple question marks. This is like, there's like a couple step 2 questions. I've taught back to basics many times. And this is actually in back to basics. I think we've talked a little bit about possibly bringing that here after we go through the steps. We'll get to that when we get there. But this is the question they would ask you. Do you now believe or are you willing to believe that there's a power greater in yourself? As soon as a man can say he does believe or is willing to believe, we empathetically assure him that he's on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. So what we're doing is we're building a foundation, right? Steps 1, 2, and 3 is the foundation. Our higher power, this connection, this belief that we're establishing is the cornerstone. We're going to build our foundation out from there. And when we get to the end of step 5, when we look at, are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put in the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? We got to go back because we got to make sure there's no cracks in the foundation. I can't afford to have a crack, but I'm going to build it off step 2. That make sense? Okay. That was the great news to us, for we assumed we cannot make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently do we all say, I wish I had what that man has. If I could only believe as he would believe. But I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him, so it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. Okay. We often found ourselves handicapped by abstinency, sensitiveness, unreasoning prejudice. Many of us have been so touchy that even a casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Underline the next sentence. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we tried to be on other questions. Keep underlining 3 of them, 3 sentences. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. It ended step 1. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they commence to get results. Sometimes you work with a man, like for my own experience, when I got to step 2, I'm in prison, I got nothing. I'm 110 pounds. Been down for 4 years, showed back up on the yard with a property box and 1 earbud. Because I tried to pop a socket in the hole to smoke a cigarette. I don't even smoke cigarettes. I'm not an electrician, believe me, dude. I'm like the most mechanically inclined dude, and I got a 1 earbud. That's what I showed up with. I had to borrow some socks. Been down for 4 years. That's where I started from. So when my sponsor says, let's put your religious beliefs aside, let's look at spirituality. Do you now believe or you're willing to believe? And I'm like, yeah, dude. I got everything to gain, nothing to lose from it, I'll tell you that. He's a great persuader. For sure. Just me?
No.
Okay, all right. I'm just checking. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. Okay, so the next part I want you to write no perfect visual proof on the side. So this is the next point it's going to make. So if you were to sit down with me and say, hey Jay, I can't believe in this power unless I can visually see God. If I don't have perfect visual proof, then I can't believe in it, right? So now it's going to make two different points where we do it all the time. So don't tell me you don't have the ability to do it because you do it with other things, which there's good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And we're going to go over it right now. So the practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they're firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of a doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it's impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. So it's referencing electricity, right? I come in, I turn the lights on. Oh shit, the lights are on. Good enough for me. Do I know what's really going on? I have no clue. I don't question it. I don't argue it. I don't care. It comes on. So when we talk about a power, when I say a power is entered into my heart and performed a miracle, and I come in here every Saturday to see you guys, and you guys consistently see other people, and you go to meetings, and we have meetings that come in, and when you've seen everybody presenting a pretty powerful argument about faith in this power, there's some pretty damn good evidence. So why argue it? Because you have the ability to do it with other things as well, just like electricity. Does that make sense? Okay. Everybody, underline the next sentence. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions, which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. If we had the time, I could rattle off another 20 different ways and different things that you don't have perfect visual proof, but you got enough good evidence, and it's good enough for you. You're seeing good evidence about the power of God performing miracles. Miracles. That should be good enough too. Okay. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality to all. To illustrate, the prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws. These laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. So there's a second example. Prosaic steel girder, masses of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. What is that? I don't care. The scientist says so. Good enough for me. What is that? I don't know. I don't care. Science. Go science, right? What are we even talking? Okay. But here's the point. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful guiding creative intelligence. Right there, a perverse streak comes to the surface. We lavishly set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books. We indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. So now when people want to talk about God and miracles in their life and a connection they've established and it's helped them dig their way and claw their way out of addiction, perform miracles in every aspect of their life, all of a sudden we want to argue it, read wordy books, windy arguments. But I have the ability to not do that in other areas when there's good evidence. So that's the point it's making right there. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's kind of wordy, right? Yeah. It's a wordy chapter. So hopefully when we look at it today, I'm trying to break it down in a way that you guys can really understand it. Because it's easy when you come. Because remember, you guys aren't here to be sponsees. You're here to be sponsors, right? And you're going to work with guys who have a big problem with the God part of it. And this chapter is so necessary for those guys. And if you don't understand it, you're not going to be able to help them establish their own connection, right? So my experience is I already believed in God. But I know the book. I know what the first hundreds, some of them went through, and I can present this evidence to them with some of my experience. And in doing so, it allows them to believe. And that's the point of we agnostics. Okay. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists choose to believe our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. Underline the next sentence. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs, when we might have observed that many spiritual-minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds, underline the rest of the sentence, were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. So that's the powerful argument that they're putting out there. They're demonstrating all the things that we want. But the power isn't there. Morals and values aren't going to be good enough. We have the ability with no perfect visual proof. I'm not asking you to fully define or even comprehend that power. Your inadequate belief is sufficient. You don't even got to believe what I believe, and it's open to everybody. You see how I just tied all three of what we went over so far in? So when I sit down to this, you guys getting the gist of this? Okay, good. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. Underline the next sentence. This is a beautiful quote. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. So, and this is my point, we missed the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. I can go to meetings and I can say, oh, that dude's high. No, dude, he's high, dude. He's picking up a chip. That shit don't work. I can say, oh, he's Demi Lovato sober. Right? He's that California sober. That shit don't work. I can go to church for an hour and walk out to the parking lot and see someone up there that was up there preaching or singing every single jam, right? Hands up the whole nine, and go out to the car and see them act like morons, kick the dog, and be like, see, God don't work, church don't work. Most of the time when I go to meetings, I think I'm different than everybody else. And I look for the differences instead of listen for the similarities. But if I do that, I'll miss the beauty of the forest because I get diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. And that's the business right there. Because if you're anything like me, my main character defect is character assassinations in my mind. Assassinate the hell. I'm like, oh, this one. Oh, yeah. Okay. In our personal stories, you'll find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these matters are about for our purpose. We need not be worried. There are questions for each individual to settle for himself. Here's the point. It's going to drive home the whole point right here. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than themselves. This power in each case has accomplished the miraculous and humanly impossible. As a celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed, they flatly declare that since they come to believe in a power, take a certain attitude toward that power, do certain simple things, there's been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking, in the face of collapse and despair, in the face of total failure of their human resources. They found a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility. Futility means pointless or useless existence that they've been living. They showed the underlying reason why they were making heavy going of life. Leave aside the drug question, the drink question for a second. They tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the conscious presence of God is today the most important fact of their life, they present a pretty powerful reason why one should have faith. That's a pretty powerful reason to me. So now we're going to transition into material, right? It's going to make a point about material and changing your point of view. And it's going to reference the material realm, the material things that we do it all the time. So we're going to read this part. Really the point is driven home on the next page. The world of ours is made more material. So if you want to write material off to the side, so you can believe. So far we've talked about morals and values not being good enough. Just having them ain't going to get the job done because there's no power. We talked about being prejudiced by God. God is a simple one that you can use with the difficult sponsees. I wouldn't say difficult, but the ones who have a difficult time believing. Then the second one we went over is just believing, right? All I want you to do is just believe. Now we've talked about no perfect visual proof and having the ability to do that. People presenting a powerful argument. Now we're going to talk about material, okay? So the world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. Yet ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, all sorts of fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near to putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. We need to ask ourselves this. So put a question mark here and underline this. Are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds have proved that man could never fly? Had not people said God reserved this privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of air was almost an old story and airplane travel was in full swing. But in most fields of our generation has witnessed a complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of rocket, and they'll say, I bet they'll do it someday. Maybe not so long either. Is not our age, so underline this next part right here, is not our age characterized by the ease which we discard old ideas for new, by the complete readiness which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new which does? Okay, so that's the point. And underline the first sentence of the next paragraph. We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. So don't tell me that you don't have the ability to change your point of view. And what it's saying is the men back in the day, the ancient times, were just as smart. The intellect was just as good as they are today, right? And they said that people will never fly. All of a sudden, people started flying and they changed their point of view. Now, here today, we're like, shit, they're taking day trips to the moon. And we're like, yeah, they're probably going to do that. I mean, right? The same readiness to change our point of view with a theory or gadget, we do it all the time. I got a pager. I got a slide-out pager because it was better, right? Then I got a Nokia brick phone because it was better, right? Then I got a camera phone because it was better. Then I got a Razr. Then I got a Sidekick. Then I got a BlackBerry. Then I got an Android because it's better. I got a VCR, right? Then I got a DVD player because it's better. Then I got a Blu-ray player because it was better. Now I stream all of that. I have my readiness to change my point of view for something new, which does. So why shouldn't we apply it? Does that make sense? Yeah. We do it all the time with everything. I got a better car because it's better. Why not our readiness to change our point of view? And why should we have that readiness? Because we were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional nature. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help of people. Was not a basic solution to these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. When we saw others solve their problem by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas didn't work, but the God idea did. That's why we should have the readiness to change our point of view. Because obviously whatever I was believing in before I found recovery was not working. So if I was to sit down with you and you were to say, I don't know, man, I believe this way my whole life and I can't believe, I've never been able to do it. And I would say, bro, you do it all the time in every aspect of your life. So don't tell me you don't have the ability to do it. And why should you do it? Because of those bedevilments that we just went over. That's why. And remember, if we fast forward or rewind one back page, people were demonstrating a degree of happiness and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. People are showing us better ways. So why not change our point of view? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. The Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems, when others showed us that God's sufficiency worked for them. We began to feel like those who insisted the Wrights would never fly. Logic is great stuff. We like it. We still like it. It's not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, to draw conclusions. This is one of man's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to a reasonable approach or interpretation. Hence we're at pains to tell you why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it's more sane and logical to believe than not to believe. Why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy, we threw our hands in doubt and said, we don't know. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fiercely face the proposition that God is either everything or else He is nothing. God either is or He isn't. What was our choice to be? It's either all or nothing. When I make this decision in step 3, right, to live by those spiritual characteristics, step 3, when we talk about turning our will and our life over to God as we understand Him, our will is our thoughts and our life is our actions, right? So my thoughts are going to be on this step 2 belief, to live by those spiritual characteristics, to be a good father, brother, son, husband, to live like my 10-year-old and my 7-week-old was by my side at all times. That's the decision I'm making. But it's got to be everything. or else it's nothing. The consistency will create a habit, but we're human. It's going to be uncomfortable, to be honest, to keep my commitments and to be tolerant and to be forgiving because I haven't lived that way in so long. So when I fail, I correct it. When I fail, I correct it. When I fail, I correct it. That consistency will create a new identity through the rest of the steps, which will help you remove the obsession to want to change the way you feel. And when you look in the mirror and you like what you see, and you see an honest, sober, loving, tolerant, forgiving, understanding man who hasn't harmed anyone today, who's kept all their commitments, you don't want to change the way you feel anymore. And that's what this thing's all about. Okay. So now we're going to talk about faith. So if you want to write faith off to the side, because faith is believing in something that you can't see. So now it's going to cross that bridge, right? Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land have brought luster to tired eyes, fresh courage to flagging spirits, friendly hands that stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we've been leaning too heavy on reason that last mile and did not like to lose our support. That was natural, but let's think a little bit more closely. Underline the next sentence, put a star next to it. Really, they drive it home a little bit deeper on the next page. But if someone is having a problem with faith, this next sentence should really shut them up. Without knowing it, have we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? So if I'm your sponsor, and we've already went over the doctor's opinion, Bill's story, there is a solution, more about alcoholism, and now we're here, and we probably met one time, just a little meet and greet, so let's just say 5 or 6 meetings. You obviously got a little bit of faith that this thing might work, or you wouldn't be coming back. So don't tell me you don't have the ability to have faith, because what are we even doing? What are we even talking about right now? You're here. So don't tell me you can't have the ability for faith. Okay. But they're going to drive it home a little deeper. Let's see. For did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have the confidence in our ability to think? What was that but short of faith? Yes, we've been faithful, objectively faithful to God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. When I get in the car, I have faith it's going to turn on. When I start driving, I have faith that I'm not going to get hit by another car. When I get to work, I have faith that the door is going to be open. Right? Everything is faith. We found too we've been worshipers. What a state of mental gooseflesh that used to bring on. How we not variously worship people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves. And then with a better motive, how we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower. Who of us have not loved something or somebody? How much do these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing we saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. Underline the last sentence. In one form or another, we've been living by faith and little else. We could break down your whole day, and we're talking about pure reason involved in your day. We're driven by faith. Like I said, it's one thing to believe. Right now we're just looking at the hope, the principle associated with step 2 and believing that we could be restored to sanity. Right? We make a decision in step 3. The principle associated with step 3 is faith. Once I put the footwork in, through awareness, I get to see this power working in my life and performing miracles in every aspect of it. That faith turns into just undeniable fact. You couldn't argue, you couldn't tell me any different. I've experienced God in my life, and I'm not going to sit here and rattle off all the different ways, but in it touches every aspect of my life, and I've experienced it. It's a fact to me today, but only when I do my part. Okay. Imagine life without faith. Were nothing left but pure reason, it wouldn't be life. But we believe in life, of course we did. We cannot prove life in the sense you can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons created out of nothing, means nothing, whirling on to a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seem more intelligent than that. At least so the chemist said. I don't even hear any laughter. That was actually an attempt at a joke right there.
That was very dry.
It was very dry. It's like a 30s joke. That was like their joke. That was like, they tried. They tried. If you don't shoot, you can't score, brother.
It was an attempt.
Yeah, it was an attempt. Okay. Hence we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason as most of us use it entirely dependable, though eminent from our best minds. What about people who prove that man can never fly? Yet we've been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world. People who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible. We only smiled. We like to tell ourselves it wasn't true. Actually, we were fooling ourselves. So on the side right here, I want you to write internal connection. I always have this misconception of when I talk about God or spiritual things, for some reason I just want to look up at the sky, right? But this is a power that flows through us, and it's going to drive that point home on the next page, the rest of this page, okay? So actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. But it's obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or another it is there. When we're born, the fundamental idea of God is there. I'm honest, I'm loving, I'm forgiving, I'm understanding, I'm tolerant, I'm all of those things, right? But it gets obscured as I get older by pomp, by worship of other things, by women, by sex, by money, by drugs. And I get so far disconnected from it that it seems so entirely out of reach to get back to that point. And when I feel again, I feel those things. And I don't like the way it feels when my actions reflect something that I don't want to be. And drugs work. Don't think, don't feel, don't care. But it's inside of us we're going to reconnect to because we have to do the work. I'm just going to give it to God and everything's going to get better. Oh, really, dude? Tell me how that's going to work for you, dude. I got to put the work in. I got to keep going back to that 50-50 relationship. Recovery's like working out. I got to do my part. If I want to get spiritually fit or physically fit, well, I got to go to the gym and I got to go every day and I got to be consistent. Even when I don't want to go, I have to do it. I got to hit sets, I got to hit reps, because recovery's just like working out. The minute I stop doing it, I'm going to lose it. But we have to align our actions with God. That's what we're establishing into, and that's the decision we're making in 3, is to let our actions reflect God and let Him work miracles in our life through the outcomes. But it's inside of us. We just got to reconnect to it. It's a power that flows through us. For faith and a power greater than ourselves, miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are as facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was part of our makeup. You see how it's driving home? In our lives. Deep down in every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God. Sometimes we had to search fiercely, but He was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found that the great reality deep down within us, in the last analysis, it's only there that He may be found. It was so with us. We can only clear the ground a bit if our testimony helps sweep away any prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourage you to search diligently within yourself. If you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come. In this book, you'll read an experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should have been to be told now. His change of heart is dramatic, convincing, and moving. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the wrap-up story, okay? So just like everything in the book, if we go back to step 1, it made a point about progressiveness, then experience from one of the first 100 to recover. The insanity, it hit us with the jaywalking. With the thinking problem, it hit us with a story, right? And it's going to continue to hit us, self-knowledge, it hit us with a story, right? So now this story right here will sum up pretty much every single point in some form or another of everything that we've just discussed. And I'll try to point it out as we go. Okay. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. So right there's being prejudiced about God, being forced to impress on Him as a child. Right? There's that one point we've already talked about. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble, frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical destruction brought him to a point of self-destruction. Drugs and alcohol being a great persuader, the bedevilments that we talked about, prey to misery and depression, couldn't seem to be of real help to people, right? There it is right there. One night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Our friend George rose out, he barely cried out, "There is a God, He certainly hasn't done anything for me." There it is, indulging in windy arguments, right? Cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs. Later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I've known are wrong? All the people in our lives presenting a pretty powerful reason why one should have faith, like we talked about? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came out and crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? This man recounts he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by the conviction of the presence of God. It poured through him, With the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood, the barriers he built up through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He stepped from bridge to shore. The bridge to shore reference comes from the faith part. He couldn't quite step ashore. Well, finally he did. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator. Thus was our friend's cornerstone. We talked about building a foundation off the cornerstone. No later vicissitude has shaken it. His drug problem, alcoholic problem was taken away that very night years ago. It disappeared. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drinking has never returned. At such times, a great revulsion has risen up in him. He could not drink even if he would. God has restored his sanity. Came to believe in a power greater than ourselves, which could restore us to sanity. We talked about being recovered previously. Of course, the mental obsession and physical allergy to want to change the way we feel has been removed from us, right? But also, too, when character assets are comfortable and character defects are uncomfortable to me, that's a good description of being recovered. It's also a good description of sanity returning. What was this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. Remember we talked about that? I know I'm just beating a dead horse here. You don't have to fully define or comprehend. Your inadequate belief is sufficient. You just got to be willing to believe, right? I don't have to believe what you believe and it's open to everyone. Circumstances made him willing to believe. Even so, as God restored us all to our right minds, to this man the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly, but he has come to all who have honestly sought him. This is the transition to step 3. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. So we're going to draw near to him through our actions in step 3. And by doing our part, he's going to show himself through the outcomes in our lives. And that, my friends, is step 2. Okay. So you see, there's a lot going on there, right? It's wordy, there's a lot going on, and if we don't break it down and really understand what we're looking at, then I won't know how to apply it. So if I was working with you guys right now and you're one of my sponsees, this is what I would ask you to do. The first thing, 3 different things. Because remember, we're going to make a decision to apply this belief next week or the next time we meet if I was your sponsor, right? So I have to understand how to apply it. Everything is required by action. Each step gives me a tool that's action related, and each step gives me a principle. If I'm going to be honest, I have to show through actions that I'm going to be honest. So the first thing I'd ask you to do, if you could, do you have a conception? Can you define God to the best of your ability for me? If you can't, we already discussed that in the book, you don't need to do it. But the reason why I ask you is because if I'm your sponsor and you tell me you believe in Jesus, or you tell me you're also true and I know they believe in God's, when I talk about other spiritual expressions with the book for you, I'll throw an S on, I'll make it plural for you, right? If your belief is laws of attraction, when we talk about other spiritual expressions, I'll talk about laws of attraction with you so you can best grasp it and understand it. But if you can't do it at that time, don't worry about it. The next thing I'd ask you to do is put down some spiritual characteristics. If you were to describe your higher power, or if you were to describe a best friend, or just some spiritual characteristics that you want to live by. And I already showed you in the beginning of this of the Big Book study tonight that every single belief you have leads right back to the same ones. List those out, as many as you possibly can. Because you're making a decision, let your actions reflect it, so you better know what they are. And then throw some morals and values you want to have in your life again. So now you've got the data, you got your beginning belief, and now you're going to make a decision in step 3 to let your actions reflect it. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, it's good to see everyone tonight, dude. I appreciate you all guys all being here. So let's have a moment of silence for the alcoholics and the addicts out there suffering, the ones who died during this meeting.